Hey everyone, how goes it? Welcome back to CSCE552 Game Development. I'm your instructor, Dr. JJ Shepard, and today we're going to continue our discussion around game development. In the past lectures, we have focused on the concept and the roles related to game production and discussed the concepts related to game design. Today, we look at the last parts of game design so that we can use this concept to develop a game. We are still within the pre-production process. We once more turn our attention to the programmer creating the technical design document. We have explored the game loop behavior pattern, along with the game object and component structural pattern to create game code. Now we put those plans in place by creating a programming task list. The programming task list is a detailed list of necessary programming assignments needed to create the game. If we have put sufficient time in designing the game software, then creating a task list is simple. The list is easily derived from our list of game objects and their associated components. We then prioritize programming tasks based on the game's necessary features and their dependencies. We have already taken the necessary features provided by the game design document and modeled them as game objects and components structurally in our technical design document. We have also modeled the dependencies between the various game objects and components by using a game object and component structural diagram in the technical design document. When one game object or a component is associated with another, we use arrows to demonstrate this relationship as a graph. In reference to establishing dependencies, I suggest asking, where does your arrow point? Once we follow the arrows, we can start seeing what depends on what, and start creating a plan and sequence for those tasks to be completed. However, we should keep in mind that the task list is not exactly the same as a schedule. A production schedule will be discussed a little later, but the task list only is a sequence of the programming tasks, but not directly when they need to be done. This is provided by a schedule. Now, we turn our attention away from the programmer for a moment. Still within the pre-production process, we turn our attention to the role of the artist. We look briefly at how to create the art list. As previously mentioned in an earlier lecture, the art list is a comprehensive list of all the game assets required. This contains a list of visual assets like sprites, 3D meshes, textures, animations, audio assets like sound effects, music, recorded dialogue, and story assets like context, story documents, screenplays, plot synopsis, dialogue script, character lists. This also assists in creating a development schedule. No matter the type, we must keep track of the asset information in the list. Some of the most necessary elements are a descriptive name and a brief description. The file name is important to reference, and also its file type, format, and specific details. These change depending on the type of asset. It's also important to keep track of which component, game object, or scene this asset is associated with. A good way to do this is in the game design document using a spreadsheet as the art list. As simple as it may sound, having a naming convention for your asset files can make a world of difference. This helps bridge the gap that can exist between the artists creating the assets from the art list and the programmers who need to use the assets in their code. There is not a single way to do this, but having information like the type of asset, related scene, game object, or component, and a reference number in a specific format can be important. For the types of assets, we can consider using TXR to stand for texture of a 2D visual asset, SFX as standing for sound effects, Mesh for a 3D model, and ANIM for an animation. For related scene, game object, or component, we can use SC, GO, and CO respectively. The specific format would order each of these parts and provide a means to separate it, such as an underscore. We can see an example of how the related name and number are all separated using an underscore. Putting this together, we can consider the file name txr_go_stone_001.png to reference a texture for a game object called stone number 1. When developing the art list, each artist should look for the nouns in the game design document and the geos in the technical design document. For visual artists, they should especially look out for characters, settings, objects of interest, objects of decoration, interfaces, and menus. For characters, make sure a note of each one also includes their actions or verbs, as these are associated with a component and will need animation associated with that. The adjectives will provide guidance for the character design. Settings is also important to look for. Natural, urban, fantasy, futuristic are all associated adjectives that help develop the setting. However, a setting can feel empty if we do not decorate it properly. This is where objects of decoration come into play. Depending on the setting, we may need to note if we need to create buildings, trees and plants, or other clutter. Items like books or containers help create a believable setting and add some attention to detail. Besides setting the scene, we also need to consider objects of interest. More often, these are interactable objects that play a significant role in the game. We can consider health containers, keys for doors, tools, and other kinds of pickups are objects of interest to look for. These may also have associated animations as well. Visual artists must also consider the different menus and interfaces in the game. Both of these deal with graphical user interfaces or GUIs. Some common menus would include the main menu, settings, and pause. Common interfaces such as heads-up displays, health bars, and inventory systems should be considered as well. With all of these, we need to consider creating backgrounds, buttons, sprites, and even fonts to create them. The game design document should contain some rough sketches of these interfaces. Now we have established what we need for the look of the game, we turn to how it sounds. A good rule to remember is everything and every action makes a sound. This means in a similar way, we need to look for the nouns and the verbs in the game design document. Like before, audio artists look for characters, settings, objects of interest, objects of decoration, interfaces, and menus. For instance, with characters and objects of interest, a sound designer would look for the verbs that correspond to the components. Every action makes a sound, and we should associate a sound effect with those actions. Running and jumping would obviously have different sound effects, but also running and walking would have different sound effects as well. We can also consider other actions like collecting an item to have a sound effect to provide meaningful feedback to the player. For setting, and by extension the objects of decoration within the settings, also make sounds. Ambient sounds from the environment and objects help to create an engaging atmosphere for the game. We may also further augment the experience by using music. Interfaces and menus are also considered, as every button click makes a sound, and many times different sounds depending on the menus or interfaces. There are also other interface sounds to consider, such as a selection sound and even background music or ambience. It can be easy to overlook the importance of sound, but when it is not done correctly, the player notices. This attention to detail can make or break the entire experience. We can also have a section in the art list for assets related to the story. However, some of these details are not exclusively found in the art list. Story assets are directly related to the dramatic elements of a game. This means the game designer, who we can consider the artist in their own right, defines the characters, the premise, and the story within the game design document, and this is not part of the art list. The art list may contain detailed story components in the form of a screenplay, dialogue scripts, and other story documents. However, these also may be separate from the art list and placed in an appendix. In relation to all of this, scripted cutscenes may require story, audio, and visual artists all working together. It's at this point that we need to critically discuss the details of the art assets. We know there are visual, audio, and story involved, but these do not exist alone out in space. They must be utilized by the programmer in order to create the game itself. With this in mind, we must know that it is important for the artist to consult with the programmers about the asset details. A major detail with all of the assets are the file types and formats. Understanding the different common file types and formats for visual audio assets come with knowing their specific underlying details. We must know what file types that are supported by the game engine via its importers. We will learn that game engines have importers that process the art assets so they are usable by the game engine. These only recognize certain file types. The programmer must know these details and provide them to the artists. In addition, both the programmers and the artists must be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of the different file types and formats, which allows them to understand their trade-offs. For example, a visual asset, we may need to know whether we need a PNG versus a JPG or JPEG. We will learn that a PNG file format provides an alpha channel for transparencies, but a JPEG does not provide this, but may be overall smaller in size. Another question related to an audio asset would be if we were going to use music in a WAV file format versus an MP3. As we will learn, using a WAV means the music would be lossless format, but its file size would be huge, while an MP3 would be much smaller, but it would provide lossy data. The artist must know the types of files and the file details required by the programmer. The artist must also know the software that is used to create those file types. Software used to create the art assets can only export a certain number of file types. It's good to be aware of which software supports which types. Now that we have the art list in place along with the technical design document, we can now move to the next part of pre-production: scheduling. The producer plans for everything, and the more details, the better. The producer creates a schedule based on milestones. These mark a significant point in time for the development process. This allows the project to be broken into smaller parts. Each milestone results in deliverables, which are completed game features. To avoid conflict, milestones and the resulting deliverables need to be specific. Exact times, exact formats, exact modes of delivery. Some of the common milestones to consider are programming milestones. These will be related to the features being developed and based on the technical design document, and would be written in the task list. Visual and audio assets being delivered is another set of milestones. It is good to have approval schedules for each asset in the art list. From here, having a playable demo created is an important proof of concept. This is also when marketing materials are considered, as we need to pass that along to publishers to help them sell the game. Having the approvals from the licensors and the platform holders, along with getting the green light in these various meetings, are critical to the schedule as well. Close toward the end of production, we need to get an ESRB rating and need to have a nearly complete game by this point. It is also worth considering vacations and holidays, as these will factor into an overall schedule. The parts listed are mostly in order, but it is not an exact formula. Many of these milestones have smaller milestones, especially the programming ones, that should be mapped out in detail. Whenever you are developing the details, make sure to prioritize the features and be willing to cut when necessary. Not everything can make it into the game, and it may be a future feature as DLC or a new game entirely. By prioritizing the features, we also reduce bottlenecks within the process. Commonly, the most important features will take the longest to create, and everything else may need to wait. Within this course, you can consider me, your instructor, Dr. J.J. Shepard, to be an executive producer who has an overall deadlines as assignments. It is your role as the project managers or producer to plan details and create your own milestones. Now that we have some plans in place, we now need to pay people and consider budgets. The budget is a spending plan. This is always an estimate of the total cost of the project, and we always aim at staying under budget. But as you can guess, this is difficult. The reality of creating a budget is difficult and requires detailed planning. When creating a budget, determining monthly costs is a great place to start. This comes from the schedule that was created previously. Some common expenses include employee salary, how much each team member will be compensated. External developer and vendor costs are calculated when other parties need to be involved creating either assets or other systems that are outside of the core development team. Equipment purchases and rental costs can add up, and there's a lot of different kinds of equipment we need to create both the game's code and the assets. Software cost plays a role in this, as we need to purchase the licenses for game engines and asset creating tools. Supplies cost is everything else, such as paper, markers, cards, dice, stationery, and other office supplies. Having meetings, we have to consider travel and meal expenses. Finally, we also consider the shipment cost of the game itself. The short answer to how much will this cost is it costs a lot. Let's now put everything together by using some past examples. We can see each of these featured in the course notes. We have spent the past lectures examining the fundamentals of game design through the concept and pre-production phases. By this point, we understand what a game is, what a game contains, who creates a game, and how to create a game concept. We have learned that this iterative process results in a game design document that commonly features an overall game design concept, a technical design document, and an art list. We have learned how to communicate these ideas to our team via mutable document like a wiki. I now must mention that while this is a means to successfully create a game, this is not the only way to approach it. Admittedly, what I have suggested has worked well for me in the past, and by putting considerable time and thought into the design and planning, it has typically paid off. Not everyone creates a game design document, and not everyone creates a technical design document either. In fact, if they do, then they may not approach it in the way that I have demonstrated. Yet, as early game creators, I believe taking the time to design a game through iterations and collaborations works better to create an overall game concept. As early game programmers, I believe that being able to identify game objects and components, which are concepts commonly featured in every game engine, helps to best structure the code so writing it will be simple. I suggest practicing these steps first, and then later, find your own way to create games successfully. Now with our plans in place, we now move to the next level, game development, and we will focus on production. This is where we must learn how to use common tools to create a game by exploring engines and assets. In these lectures, we have discussed the fundamentals of games and the process to create them. We have learned how to put our plans together to communicate with our team, and we are ready to start putting it together. Until then, make sure to double check those plans, and I'll talk to you next time. Now it's time for a bonus round. What is the task list? The programming task list is a detailed list of necessary programming assignments needed to create the game. What are the common sections in the art list? Visual assets, audio assets, and story assets. What is a schedule milestone? Milestones mark a significant point in time for the development process and results in deliverables. What is a good way to derive a budget? Calculating monthly costs from the schedule that includes common expenses like employee salary, equipment expenses, and shipping costs. Now, let's look ahead with our forward vector. We're going to discuss how what was presented relates to this course's assignments. Include in your game design document wiki an art list that contains both visual and audio assets with their details. Along with that, make sure to include a schedule which notes the team tasks, programming tasks, art tasks, and testing tasks. Make sure to also include when those tasks need to be completed. With all that being said, I'll talk to you next time.